We now move on to our technical session 1, which is on PM Gati Shakti National Logistic Policy. I would request Srimati Vandana Agarwal, Chairperson IFCA Committee on Ship Acquisition, to be on the dais, and would like to invite Mr. Ashutosh Jaiswal, President International Business Division and Logistics Century Plyboard India Limited, and is co-chairperson of the Shipping and Logistic Committee of the Bengal Chamber, to be on the dais and moderate our today's technical session 1 on PM Gati Shakti. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We will request you to be seated. May I now introduce Mr. Ashutosh Jaiswal. Mr. Jaiswal is a science graduate from St. Xavier's College, Kolkata, and recently completed his leadership program from Cornell University, USA. He has more than 35 years of experience in business planning, business strategy, operation management, supply chain management, strategic planning for international trade, shipping and logistics of Century Group. He has conceptualized, planned, developed, implemented, marketed the first private sector container freight station at Kolkata in 2008 and the second in 2010, and implemented the total software technology basis, the Digital India, for both the CFS, including yard mapping, RFID, GPS, from the time of nomination of containers to delivery. He has been given the responsibility of HR of the company to take it to the next level and has conceptualized and bidded for Kolkata Port KPD1 West for 6 berths and awarded the same as HI. He has vast experience in setting up business, running them successfully from scratch, policy decision on developing exports, identifying new countries and products, and is through in Exim Policy and Customs Act. Sir, we will now request you to take over the session and introduce the other panelists of the technical session 1.
Hello. Welcome to the 12th Annual Shipping and Logistics Conclave by Bengal Chamber of Commerce, and I thank Srimati Vandana Agarwal to make this happen and be present here. She is of immense importance because I heard her just now on shipping finance and how logistics played an important role, and her clear concept about cost of logistics coming to 8 to 9% and not 14%. All these years we have been all worrying why it is 14 and why sometimes I've heard ministers speaking about 18% also. So I mean, now at least we are sure that our logistic cost is somewhere around 8 to 9%, and we will need to bring it further down. Thank you, madam. Thank you for visiting us and being a panelist here. And we now also have Mr. Nitin Kumar from PwC. Nitin has been with PwC for 18 years. He's a director there with India's Capital Project and Infrastructure Practice. And Nitin would add value with respect to today's PM Gati Shakti as well as National Logistic Policy, which we'll be discussing today. So now, my first question would be to Madam, because you are considered to be the formulator with respect to the National Logistic Policy. So first and foremost, PM Gati Shakti. Gati Shakti means speed and power. How does that speed and power get merged with the National Logistic Policy and actually benefit the trade and commerce? I would like to hear something on that from you.
That is actually a question that should be posed to Sumita Daura, who is the Secretary of Logistics. She would better address that. But let me first say that I can't claim that I have formulated the national... Okay. I can't claim that I have formulated the national logistics policy at all. So it's just that I was part of the committee that was looking to develop the national logistics policy. So it has come after a huge amount of deliberations and the best minds of India, and including Indian industry, giving very important inputs as to what needs to be done. Where I think we worked very differently, and that will have a bearing on the Gati Shakti and the national logistics linkage as well, from where I see it, is that under the national air cargo policy, for instance, we had an extensive set of IT-based solutions, including the overall integration of all the infrastructure in which is airport-based infrastructure, and subsequently to extend it also to the warehouses, first of all with the multimodal warehouses that are coming up in the country, and through that to shipping and to the other multimodal means of transportation. So it seeks to harness the cost efficiencies and other value chain efficiencies through the national logistics policy. What we envisaged was that by integrating the different areas of where any shipping consignment, for instance, is going to touch a different department or a different sphere or a different component in the entire value chain, those will get integrated. I think I will let Price Waterhouse answer more on that. I'm not an authority.
It's okay. So what I would like to hear from you, because now you have immense knowledge on ship financing. So why India had been lagging as far as ship owning is concerned? Is it only the funding structure, or was it largely the policy of owning, or what is the tax havens which people were enjoying out of India? What is that why India was lagging behind owning ships?
It's not just owning ships, it's also even chartering operations out of India. Most of them are being done through hubs abroad. So it's very difficult to give one single reason, but if I have to be blunt, and I mentioned it obliquely, is that when I was studying the matter, I found that by and large from 1970 onwards, the Indian shipping enterprises started moving offshore. These are the big ship owners as well, who were there in India, or Indian ship owners. They started moving to the maritime hubs of excellence or eminence, whatever words you want to use. They took advantage of the opportunity presented by India's enterprises moving offshore or to their locations, or being attracted to those shores, because India was a very big market as well. India represents both exports and imports in a very big way. So we lost the opportunity for moving our own cargo from Indian shores, or by enterprises who own ships within India and who had the big wherewithal to do chartering operations also from out of India. Now, why did they move out? Obviously, through the years, perhaps sufficient flexibilities, tax incentives or breaks were not being given to the sector comparable with those that maritime hubs could give. It's always a comparative framework. So other countries moved faster than us in attracting not just the talent, but also capital, but also the ship owning entities. This is perhaps in a nutshell what I can say. The rest is, I will be presenting the details as well.
So madam, my last question to you with respect to shipping, that normally, we have been hearing from childhood that, shipping is such a business that you need to have it in your blood, unless and we talk about Greeks, they are pioneers into shipping. We talk about Hollanders, they are pioneers into shipping. So Indians largely have never been more attracted towards shipping because they thought shipping maybe is something very huge, something very different, something very high technology. But according to the new policies which are coming and which are being adopted by Government of India, do you think that in years to come, that Indian entrepreneurs would come largely as ownership ships or chartering ships from India, within India, with the tax stops which the government is planning?
So I would say that I don't agree with you that maritime matters are not in India's blood. I think our ancestors will be turning in their graves to hear us on this matter. What perhaps, as I said, we have not realized is we have not grasped the opportunities when other countries were taking initiatives. But what has now been done, since India's economic reform program started, so it has been a continuum from 1991 onwards. And for shipping and logistics, there has been a very steady focus in the last few years. And we have, on shipping and logistics, but infrastructure development has been there for the last decade or so now. So we should begin to see Indian enterprise moving to India simply for one fact alone. Our financial models, as I said, for all the three activities, ship owning, ship leasing or chartering, as well as the trade itself, show that the regime that we are putting in place in India offshore, which is GIFT City, is competitively more competitive than any other regime.
Mr. S.B. Majumdar had raised a question with respect to barge financing. So do you think the government is putting stress on barge financing because they are now concentrating largely on Jal Shakti Marg, and I find that more than 40% of the GDP's expenditure with respect to last year has been added to this year too. So do you think that barge financing also as an IFSCA member is a core focus of Government of India?
Again, we were not looking at barge financing. I did hear him raise this matter. So I don't have numbers for that. I can't say that with barge financing happening from GIFT City, necessarily that will be more competitive than from anywhere in the world. But we did look at inland waterways quite seriously, and we looked at ships of different sizes as well. We looked at tugs or other port flotilla. We looked at the big ones as well. And we found ourselves to be competitive when we're looking at all aspects. It's a full financial model. So I would be very surprised to find that somehow in the kind of environment and regulatory ease that is being put in place in the GIFT City, barge financing is not enabled or is not competitive. I would be very much surprised.
Thank you, madam. Thank you. Nitin, I would like to ask you certain questions with respect to PM Gati Shakti and National Logistic Policy. Gati Shakti of late, in the trade has really brought in a tremor, as is what it is. Somebody thinks that it's a sort of a policy. Somebody thinks that it's a digital platform. Somebody thinks that it's an integration of 16 or 17 ministries. So can you highlight something about Gati Shakti and how it would actually impact the trade largely? and whether it will be impacting the trade directly or not, or how it would stitch itself with national logistic policy. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. My fellow esteemed panelists and distinguished members present here. Talking about the national the PM Gati Shakti National Master Plan, I think this is one of the game changers which brings out the framework for an integrated planning, development, and implementation of the entire infrastructure projects. So when we look at this PM Gati Shakti, as you said rightly, it is a integrated digital platform where you have the visibility of not only the infrastructure which is as present here, but also which are going to be planned. So it gives a visibility not only to the central ministries, but across the state governments, different departments, what is the infrastructure which is present, what is the planning which is happening, and also it gives that confidence to build the infrastructure. So that entails is all about this PM Gati Shakti National Master Plan. So this master plan, to enable this implementation of this master plan, we have this policy which is the logistics, national logistics policy, which brings out how efficient the logistics industry can become. Logistics, as we all understand, is it is a debatable whether it is 12% or 14% cost of the GDP, but we all realize that it has to be more efficient and competitive going forward if we want to be, create the value chain, create the ability to be competitive not only locally but globally. So the logistics policy talks about those enablers. When we look at the efficiency, the logistics cost, to how to bring the efficiency in the logistics cost, it has got three components. One is the infrastructure side, second is the operations and the service side, third is that human resource side. So when we look at the first side, which is the infrastructure side, this is taken care by the PM Gati Shakti National Master Plan. This is the whole impetus on building an infrastructure which is coherent, which is coordinated, which is integrated. The second two components, which is the service part, which includes also the regulatory aspect, and the third component, which is the human resources, the skilling that we were talking about earlier in the day. These two components are brought on by the logistics policy, which has the focus on how to bring efficiency in this logistics industry. So this is the way these two are integrated. First came the the Prime Minister Gati Shakti National Master Plan in October 21. Then the National Logistics Policy as an enabler for the logistics industry, it was launched in October 22. This is the way both complement each other.
So now you see, when we talk about national logistic policy, I mean, national logistic policy is a huge framework, right? I mean, where what we have seen in the past also, that medium and players below medium, they don't even have a knowledge of that policy, number one. Number two, even if the policy is there, I mean, they do not have that setup to run such logistic companies, and therefore they incur an inefficiency cost, and that inefficiency cost adds to the largely to that GDP we are talking about, 8, 9, 12, 14, whatever it is. So how does the government plan, or what is the plans of the government with respect to increasing the skills or enhancing the skills or imparting knowledge to such logistic companies who can actually reduce their inefficiency cost and thereby bring in the cost of logistics?
That's a very valid question. When we look at this national logistics policy, so it gives a basic framework that not only at the central level, but at every state level, we will have a state logistics policy. The state's logistics policy, also the state logistics plan, along with the city logistics plan. That is the level of framework and the institutional mechanism which is being taught about through this logistics policy. So when the theme of skilling the private sector comes in, so there are a lot of interface which is now being built up through this logistics policy. We talk about the Unified Logistics Interface Platform. This is the ULIP, which gives the entire information about the different processes, where my goods are moving, which is the mode which is being taken through it. So that entire digitalization of the logistics value chain, that value chain through a digital platform gives access to every person who can, view his logistics, movement of logistics, and also gives idea about how competitive the logistics cost is, globally. Further, we as a industry or a private sector did not have much of a stakeholder or a feedback to to the government to see to ease of doing logistics. With the logistics policy and the leads, which is logistics ease across the different states, there is a framework of annually giving feedback to the government through a structured mechanism. All these logistics players or stakeholders have a mechanism to give feedback to the government about the inherent what are the challenges they are facing, including the skilling part of it. So that there are regular programs being undertaken under the framework of this logistics policy, wherein you can attach yourself to those programs and reskill yourself, or the skilling happens subsequently. So these are the frameworks wherein the skilling also is impetus inbuilt in this logistics policy.
Okay, so now when an entrepreneur wants to come into logistics, I mean, he wants to invest into that infrastructure. You see, the cost of funding in this country today is not at par with international funding rates. So what happens is, and the gestation period is quite long. When somebody invests in a terminal and invests about 200 crores or 300 crores, and the cost of funding comes to around 8.5%, then in that case, it becomes a little tough for him. Or on the other side, what happens is, the cost of operation goes up, and therefore it impacts the logistics sector. So has Government of India actually worked something on a subsidized rate of interest for infrastructure development with respect to logistics?
Coming to this question, I think through this Gati Shakti National Master Plan, it is envisaged that holistic development of the logistics infrastructure takes place. When I say holistic development, you look at the entire set of complementing infrastructure, the last mile connectivity, the utilities, everything. So when a project comes through this type of project development, the investor should and the bankers should feel more confident that I have more visibility that the associated or the complementing infrastructure comes well in time, and plus the last mile connectivities. So that confidence about the numbers, the business plan, I think this will make these type of projects much more bankable for say. So that is from the infrastructure perspective. So we are seeing a lot of traction on MMLPs, like we were just before speaking about more than 50 MMLPs are being planned. Even more than 100 Gati Shakti cargo terminals are being planned by the Indian Railways, and we are seeing a lot of traction. We had one bids have already been received for MMLPs. Going forward, there are 4 in the bidding process also. So a lot of funds and the private sector is coming for this logistics infrastructure. Coming to the the transport side of it, the trucks, the assets that we talk about. Yes, that is one aspect of financing for trucks. Those type of infrastructure is a challenge presently, but I think going forward, that's a good feedback which the government and the financial institutions should think about how we can more effectively finance the trucking industry. And in India, I think the trucking industry is one of the most not at par with the technology or the condition of the assets that it should be. With the impetus on the recycling and phasing out of old trucks, I think these type of incentives which will be coming out through this industry, I think that's a good way to start for somebody who wants to enter into the logistics sector.
Yeah, my last question to you, as you rightly said that the trucking industry in this country is not organized to that level when we talk about international scenarios. See, a truck driver spends his life in the truck, right? Almost his life. So has that national logistic policy identified this part of the shortcoming into the entire trade, that the cycle of a truck driver should be limited to 8 to 10 hours, not beyond that. Because by doing that, what happens, number one is, the utilization of truck today is not to the percentage of 90 or 95%. It is coming actually 60 to 65% utilization. And if we have 2 to 3 drivers, then automatically the utilization of the truck goes much higher, and thereby the cost of logistics comes down. Have the government actually considered something with respect to utilization of, I mean, the trucking sector side of the business, basically?
Yeah, sure. So there are two sides to it. One is the infrastructure side. So when we have a city logistics plan, when we have a state logistics plan, it also talks about creation of an entire logistics environment. So we'll have a proper transport nagar sort of a thing, which has all the associated facilities for any logistics any players in the logistics sector, for example, drivers of the trucks. So they have those facilities. So that is the facility part of it. The second aspect is, how to have, some sort of a rest between those two journeys. So, we have now digitally enabled applications which enables the the trucking community also to integrate itself. And one truck driver, for example, moves, from Kolkata to Bhubaneswar, and then the next set of driver moves from Bhubaneswar to Visakhapatnam. So those type of digital interventions have come in, which gives that you are able to exploit the asset more, while at the same time you are able to give rest to the drivers.
Yeah, I agree to it, but these are largely being utilized by digital apps companies like Rivigo and truckers and all. They are doing largely to utilize their assets more.
Yes.
But down the line, the larger platforms, the single owner truck owners or a fleet of 10, they have not been able to have access to that or reduce their cost. That is the concern.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's this market is so fragmented that there are multiple individual small truck owners who do not have access to these programs. And we do understand the nature of the goods that they carry. So that also is a challenge for them. So that we have to see how we can enable through this logistics policy. We have a feedback mechanism through which, when we say about e-logs, again it's a digital mechanism, and the lead survey, through which these type of concerns can be shared with the government authorities to look at it, how these interventions can help the small truckers also, which were not, probably in a structured way heard before, but now through this logistics policy and the leads and the e-logs, they have access to the government authorities to share their, challenges.
So thank you. Now, as we have sufficient time, we would like to take certain questions. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, in fact, we have Dr. Preetham Kumar, I think so. Preetham Banerjee, yeah. Yeah, Dr. Preetham, in fact, that's good that you would be able to answer some of my questions which has been unanswered as of now. So number one would be, my first question was, how does PM Gati Shakti integrate with the national logistic policy, number one. And number two is, does it percolate down the line to the last person in the logistics who actually wants to develop his logistic business and bring it and reduce the cost and bring it to the trade in the larger platform? Over to you. Thank you. You're muted.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yeah, now you are audible.
Thank you very much. First, I have to thank Bengal Chamber of Commerce, Sukanya, and of course Vandana ji for having me participate in this very eminent panel, and very, very pleased to be here. Before I respond to your two questions, I'd just like to add a few comments to what my esteemed previous speaker was talking, especially your point about the truckers. Now, this idea of multiple drivers doing shifts, this has also been tried in other parts of the world, and I would like to report not so successfully, especially when you have this fragmented nature of the industry where many of the drivers are in fact owners, or it's a family business where 3 or 4 people are driving the trucks together because they don't trust somebody else with their conveyance, their vehicle. So to what extent these solutions are workable remain open-ended. I think Where the biggest bang for the buck would lie is, of course, creating appropriate rest facilities, etc., which would definitely improve the lives of truckers, but also where PM Gati Shakti actually is trying to work on, where their infrastructure becomes such. I mean, there is no reason why the average transit time or average speed of a truck that we have today, which is between 30 to 35 kilometers in our better road networks, should continue to persist. We could attempt to reach a level where we're doing 50 to 55 kilometers per hour, which is also the standard in other parts of developed parts of Asia. I'm talking even of countries like Thailand. So once you do that, then let's say a Bombay-Delhi run, the transit time itself will become much more manageable for a truck driver. So that's really where I think Prime Minister's Gati Shakti, and this was just one example of how Prime Minister's Gati Shakti will touch the lives of ordinary people in the logistics industry. So to go back to your question, as was pointed out, I'll just like to summarize what Prime Minister's Gati Shakti is. So one, I think my colleague mentioned, really from PwC mentioned what I would like to call the static layer, where you have these 7 different GIS mappings from, starting from the above the soil infrastructure, electricity grids, etc., the roads, railway, canals, everything on the surface, and then below the surface, which is your fiber optic cables. And all of it, this is mapped. This is the as is. And as was rightly mentioned, this provides, and as is meaning both what is already there and what is in the pink books, which is planned. But where does the PM Gati Shakti really add value? It adds value because you will know there were 3 very important shortcomings in infrastructure development in the country. The first one was that, where should we focus on? What mode should we focus on? If I'm going to expand a highway from 2 to 4 in a certain stretch, what's the logic of it? What we are trying to move with Prime Minister's Gati Shakti now is into predictive modeling. Because what you also have is a lot of rich data from, the GST e-way bills, from FOIS, which maps the railway network, and other such sources. And you look at the trends of urbanization growth from the state government databases, and you put all of this big data into a structure where you look at both the logistics moves required for production as well as consumption, and you, based on that data, you plan for future expansions of infrastructure, whether brownfield expansion or new infrastructure to be put in. The other part is the center-state cooperation, because you will see that most of the industrial clusters, corridors, logistics parks, etc., their land and the development processes with the states. And then you have all this arterial infrastructure which doesn't actually connect to that industrial location or to that logistics park. There's always this last mile which can stretch from less than a kilometer to several kilometers or more, which is basically a state government's responsibility. The last mile typically tends to be the state government's responsibility. So this coordination between state and center through Prime Minister's Gati Shakti becomes a critical factor. Especially because there's a 1 lakh crore corpus which state governments can avail of under certain conditions under the PM Gati Shakti to address some of these challenges. And it's very interesting that it does that. So how does the national logistics policy then fit into all of this? Well, if Prime Minister's Gati Shakti is the physical hard infrastructure intervention, the national logistics policy is the soft part of it. And the soft part of it addresses many different segments, as was pointed out by my colleague, but I'll like to stress on the few of the more important ones. The first one is digitalization. And the big piece of that is the ULIP, or the Unified Logistics Interface Portal. Now, this is a work in progress, but the idea is a UPI-like data stack, right? But it's somewhat more complicated because unlike, financial sector logistics, it tends to be across several different silos. So you have all the regulatory digital silos, in shipping, in aviation, in rail, in road. You have the entry kind of customs related digital silos as well. You have the GST related digital silos as well. But you have many other kind of regulatory silos that need to be integrated. So yeah, there's this one layer of kind of integrating through this data stack all the regulatory pieces of the data, that digital information that you have. Now you can then, it will be made open to any private sector developer to leverage all of access to all of this data to come up with solutions for the industry. Now, why this is radical is that when this data stack did not exist, for a very small startup entrepreneur to be able to approach all of these different agencies, have some mechanism of secure data exchange and develop a application or a solution would have been very difficult. But today, once the ULIP data stack is ready, it will be very, very easy to do this, much more easier. So now think of an entrepreneur, let's say in a state like Tamil Nadu, who wants to develop an app for Tamil speaking truckers. They will be able to then use this data and develop this app relatively easier. And maybe what this app would do, because it's now tied to the, not just the e-way bill, but also the FASTag and other such systems, whereby they provide a mechanism using analytics to help truckers reduce their empty return journeys. That would add an enormous amount of value at the ground level. So this data stack would radicalize the development of low-cost digital applications, which will make sense for the logistics industry. As was pointed out, skills is the other interface, but another very important interface is standards. One of the reasons why seamless logistics is not as up to the level that we see in other parts of the world is that we have, we don't have standardized equipment, we don't have standardized, equipment that we use for transport or for storage or warehousing. So driving these standards and also driving quality, not through compulsory means, not through, regulatory means, but more through nudge. And that means that you create a system of awards and incentives, which will be developed over a period of time to drive the industry in that direction. The other is, what the national logistics policy does is to target some of the key subsectors in the economy which account for a very large percentage of the volumes of goods that we move. So cement, food grains, steel, coal, sectors of this nature, which account for very large volumes. To come up with sectoral logistics plans for this, with interventions in both the physical equipment as well as the modal priorities that can, and that's where the linkage comes, right? Because you want to improve the optimal modal mix for certain types of moves. So you want to do more by rail or more by coastal or inland water. That's where Prime Minister's Gati Shakti will come in. As was pointed out, multimodal logistics parks is the other one. So, from my own operational experience, I can tell you that, having the luxury of going to a plug-and-play logistics park or a multimodal logistics park and getting, 200,000 square feet or 400,000 square feet to set up a facility, that would be great for the industry, which, it will take away all the headache of, if you do a greenfield on your own, where you've got to get all the approvals, start from scratch. So these kind of mega infrastructures that are located at the right place will then provide kind of more of plug-and-play environment, which National Logistics Policy will be pushing, and it's already working in that direction with the National Highway Logistics Management Limited, the NHLML, which entity was created specifically to develop these 35 multimodal logistics parks at critical locations across the country. So, and of course, last is the leads. And the leads is an example of competitive federalism, right? So it covers a comprehensive set of regulatory and operational indicators of the quality of logistics across states. And, states will tend to want to score higher or be ranked higher. And the understanding is that the states will then look at their ranking and start looking at where the gaps are in their own state and addressing them, and therefore improving the whole logistics ecosystem. For the lack of time, I will stop here. That gives a flavor, I think, to you I hope I answered the questions.
Yeah, that's fine. So, Dr. Pritam, I would again come back to the same question which I asked Nitin. The government, when they designed the logistic policy, when the logistic policy is designed, the infrastructure also was a part of it, right? When we talk about the infrastructure and the private sector coming into that infrastructure, investing money, so the cost of funding in India, as far as infrastructure is concerned, with respect to logistics or shipping, whatever it is, so it's very high. So has the government considered anything with respect to the cost of infrastructure, which is a long gestation period with respect to infrastructure development in India?
See, in terms of, if you're thinking in terms of an interest subvention or subsidy or anything of that sort, not much is there. Of course, there some states are, going forward and declaring logistics to be a priority sector, which might give you a certain amount of few percentage point advantage as far as the cost of your loan is concerned. But what it is trying to do is, develop land infrastructure and link it with these, as I said, these mega facilities, right? So the cost of your total project, including overruns, etc., is due to the fact that land acquisition costs are high. They're also because, as you rightly pointed out, that gestation periods can extend because approvals are slow to come by. I have personal experience when I was in industry of a few examples of this. So what these multimodal logistics parks and generally logistics parks being promoted by the state under the state logistics policy will tend to do that, at least for the warehousing and some of the transport related infrastructure bits, it will allow industry to go into a plug and play mode where you have a competitively priced location already where you can go rent, lease or own depending on the models that they're operating on at a much more competitive price because the land acquisition has been done already by the government. Basic infrastructure has already been built. You basically have to put up the value added infrastructure. For example, if you want to set up a reefer warehouse, you have to put in whatever capital equipment you need, roofing, etc., and the machinery, and then start operations. But your gestation period and your time to operation will be much lower. You will not have the headache of getting all the approvals. And because the land has been through this PPP mode, where the state government in these logistics parks have come in with land as their share of equity in the facility, the cost will be much lower overall compared to, let's say, a greenfield project. So this is one way where it is helping out. But if you're thinking of mega projects like, let's say, a port or even a greenfield project related to a private rail terminal, etc., there you will anyway run into the problems that I mentioned, land acquisition, etc., and the cost of credit is what it is in India. There is no subsidy on the interest rate per se in the policy.
Thank you, Dr. Pritham. In fact, we got a very good insight from you, and now I would leave it to the audience for any questions to Dr. Pritham, Srimati Vandana Agarwal, or Nitin with respect to PM Gati Shakti and National Logistic Policy. Anybody, any questions? Please, mic there, please. Yeah.
Hello. So with respect to the
please introduce yourself first.
My name is Shantakumar.
Yeah.
Shantakumar.
Yeah, okay.
With respect to the shipping finance, which you are asking a question, I believe the shipyards which are constructing ships, commercial ships in India, they do not have any tie-ups with the banks to finance the ships. This is one aspect probably the government can look at. The shipyards which are constructing the ships, there are no tie-ups with the banks. Whereas now today, if I want to acquire a personal vehicle or a commercial vehicle for the road transport, I can easily get it from any of the finance companies or directly from the producers also. But that's not the case with shipping.
Actually, when you asked about financing options, is government thinking of doing something? There is a NIIF, which is the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund, that has been created by the government, and that, by its very terminology, looks at how the government can, by providing either equity finance or debt finance, enable the development of projects such as the one that you are speaking about, which is shipbuilding industry.
No, madam, I think he is referring to yards in China.
I spoke, no, I understood that, but I want to answer it from our perspective, that is it going to be competitively financed? Could there be a tie-up? So the NIIF could provide part funding, and the NIIF in itself is reaching out to other debt financiers, other equity financiers, to see how a holistic financing can be provided. The banks are at liberty themselves to, and are being encouraged to have tie-ups with the yards as well. So I think we have to just wait to see some things develop, but I'm not an advocate for subsidizing interest, which is something that has been mentioned in this room earlier. As I said, when we looked at even the shipbuilding model, financial model, we looked at the ship chartering model, on a end-to-end basis, we found that even though our cost of capital was comparatively high as compared to a Korea or a Japan or a China or any other place, but we do have other cost efficiencies, and the net result was a competitive result. So I think we need to look at where our advantages are and see how we can act on it. On the logistics side, for instance, we found that there was almost a 30% advantage, cost advantage we have in terms of the setting up, the administration, and other costs. 30%, it's quite a sizable amount. So we harnessed those efficiencies into our models in a very realistic way, taking actual examples, including actual ships being built in India, being financed, or ship chartering out of India as well. So I think you need to see the details of those models, and perhaps you'll get the answer.
Also, I think maybe except one or two banks, there is no fully dedicated shipping team.
Yeah, so our banks, if you ask me, and it's hardly surprising, they don't have dedicated ship desks, they don't have dedicated aircraft desks. For the first time, Bank of Baroda Capital Corporation, it recruited a person, one person, who would address the aircraft financing. When we were nudging them that, can you please do something? When we speak to your officers that, look, this is what's happening on aviation finance, or this is the specialized nature. So I think we have to wait for our banks to get their acts together as well. And I happen to speak to a number of foreign banks, and guess what? The experts in aviation finance, the experts in marine finance will, to a huge extent, Indians.
Unfortunately.
Fortunately, unfortunately. I don't know how you will see that.
Madam, my name is Tapus Banerjee. I'm part of this Shipping and Logistics Committee.
Just, can I, just before you take your question, you know, what Preetham was pointing out, that Gati Shakti looks at what is the existing state of play, and it looks to see how to address through predictive and through other connectivity. I want to give an example of how we looked at it when aviation was concerned and the multi-modal nature. You know, in an airport is necessarily not located close to factories or to consumer points, and there is always a multimodal or trucking component to it. In July, we used, for instance, a gate pass system for the trucks, which would pre-identify through the digital platforms of a particular airport. It could have more than one terminals or operators which are providing cargo services, the airport cargo services. So, but the unified digital platform that was developed by the airport operator, irrespective of which is the service provider at a terminal, the truck with the identification of the driver also pre-done, they would have a gate pass, and they would have a truck parking bay already pre-assigned. So it eased matters a lot. I'm giving this as a very small example, but to make a bigger point that it's not just for truck gate pass for trucks. The digital infrastructure or the digital framework that had been developed in the airport is to be linked at one airport without modifying it, is to be linked to the same digital platform which has been separately developed, say at a Bombay or a Delhi or a Chennai, etc. So the attempt is through the Gati Shakti to use existing facilities, link them up through the ULIP or any other overall digital platform that will be developed by private players or by government. And the attempt is that at one click of a button, you can get quotations, you can get from different service providers, you can have the actual applications also taken up, the actual running of your tender also taken up. So it's, it's an attempt to harness existing, but in a wider cloud. And the same technology that we were using at our airports has been picked up, and our service, Indian Digital Service Provider, has gone and developed similar facilities at Atlanta, Boston, and many other airports actually. So what we have going on the logistics side, which is the multimodal part, airports as the hub, but taking up other multimodal activities that are taking place alongside, and developed a digital platform. So that's what gave us the idea that we should embed this somewhere in our national logistics policy as well, but obviously at a much bigger plane. I don't know whether I'm making sense, but
No, it's
this
okay.
is how the
I think,
ideas were coming up.
Anyway,
Sorry, I interrupted.
Mr. Tapas.
Yeah. Madam, my question is that you have mentioned that a ship is a bankable asset.
Yes.
Now, in spite of holding a bankable asset, why bankers insist on other collaterals till date? Because if I go, they will ask me, what is the collateral you can offer apart from the ship which I am going to finance? So till date, we have got that mindset. Apart from that, madam, you say that, okay, if I have a COA, contract of affreightment, that is also a bankable document. But with that COA, I will not get any working capital finance to take a vessel on a period. So still these are the lacunas prevailing in our banking system. How to counter this?
Okay, so partly it's a question of the regulations that are in position. And what do I mean by that? Is the bankruptcy code, for instance, clearly aligned with other practices or other laws which impact your financing from banks or even working capital? In the case of aircraft, there is an international convention, the Cape Town Convention, which allows somebody who has ownership or a lessor status in the bankable asset to take possession of that aircraft the moment he finds that the lessee is not going to be able to make the payments to him, or the lessee, which is an airline, is going bankrupt. Okay? He has the authority under the international convention to apply to the regulator, which is DGCA, and within 5 working days, the DGCA is bound to deregister that aircraft from the lessee, which is the airline, and give it to the lessor or the aircraft owner. In such a case, the banks know for sure that when they are giving finance to the lessor, I'm sort of going very much into detail, but you understand the concept. In the case of ships, there is no such convention which is applying. So that's at the international plane between when you have international financiers along with Indian financiers to finance your ship. Why will the Indian financiers look at it differently? The second is, as I hinted, that you have, and we have identified exactly what needs to change in different provisions of the laws that govern ship finance, whether it is capital investment or it is working capital needs of people. We have identified the exact clauses which need to be changed. Once there is coherence, then the banks will also not seek these, I presume.
No, madam.
A third thing is, we have had a history which is a fairly negative history. So again, going into the case of aircraft, you know, you would have traveled through airports of India, you would have found Kingfisher aircraft in Bombay airport or in Bangalore airport, just parked out there for years on end. You would have found Jet Airways aircraft parked for years, not so much for years, but for a few little while. And this is because when Kingfisher went bankrupt, or when Air Deccan went bankrupt, and others did, Damania Airways, etc., the owners of the aircraft were not able to repossess them in a timely way. They were still lying there. Kingfisher aircraft are still lying at the airports because the incoherence or the conflict between different legal provisions have not been addressed, including of the IPC. So we identified those as well. When the Jet Airways debacle happened, for instance, this is in the year 2019, we moved very swiftly to put in place, we knew it was coming, but we put in place appropriate changes along with Department of Company Affairs. There were certain corporate Companies Act provisions which were also hindering bank finance. Okay? So we put those in place very quickly, and the result was that out of the 126 aircraft that Jet Airways owned, 55 of them we were able to immediately recycle to other lessees within India by the lessors. Why were they able to do that? Because it was recognized that an aircraft is a bankable asset. It could be repossessed, and the banks didn't have any problem. So now what we find is that, and the remaining, which were not owned by Jet Airways, but which had been leased out from other owners overseas, they were allowed to go whenever the lessor wanted them. So you have to create the regulatory regime, plus you have to get rid of the perceptions that Indian enterprise is going to play the game not for long term, but for short term gains. I think that in a nutshell, we have to address.
No, madam,
Actually, we are running short of time, so can you just make it fast so that we...
Yeah, just as far as aircraft is concerned, I think there is a concept of dry lease and other that for which that wet lease and dry lease. But as far as shipping is concerned, what we have got is bareboat cum demise charter. Now here also in shipping, well, forget about the regulatory part. In the event of any failure, there is an admiralty in rem. So the liability passes on to the new owner. So it is much more stricter regulation prevailing all over the world. Till then, our bankers are having a little bit of mindset problem. Let me share a very short example of my lifetime experience. When I went to buy a ship, I went to Greece at the time of taking a delivery. I was sitting with the banker, and the banker asked me, what sort of documents your bankers ask? I told him, these are the documents you have to produce. Out of curiosity, I asked him, Mr. Banker, what documents you ask when you finance a ship? They told me, first and foremost thing what I want is the promoter's background, whether they have the DOC, whether they have the ISM ISPS for the intended asset. Now, please show me a single banker in India who has got this level of knowledge to finance a ship. Thus, it is not the mindset of the entrepreneurs. It is also the mindset of the bankers that need to be changed. That's a,
Yeah, so it's the regulatory mindset, which, so first the legal mindset has to change, which is the laws have to be in conformance. We have already identified them. Regulations which are governing have been established under the laws, they need to be coherent with each other. The mindset of the industrialist needs to be that yes, he may be the first charge, but he can do business in India, from India, right? And finally, and most importantly, the bank itself needs to create those verticals which can understand ship finance and know what documents to ask for, what his KYC should be, or what his assessment of risk of an applicant should be.
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much. And we would like to end the session. Thank you, Dr. Preetham, for being with us. Thank you, madam. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nitin. And we would like to close the session. And over to Sukanya.
Thank you so much. Before we close the session, we have a present task to perform. I would request Mr. Ashutosh Jaiswal to hand over a token of memento to Mr. Kumar. Thank you so much.